Room 101, Episode 4, When Animals Attack. H.G. Wells' Food of the Gods meets B-Movie Mogul Bert I. Gordon.
It's not nice to fool Mother Nature.
I begin this episode of Room 101 by stating that I will never disparage inaccurate predictions made by science fiction writers who grew up by candle and kerosene in the 19th century. The greats, including Mary Shelley, Jules Verne, and H.G. Wells, had very little relevant science to go by. That being said, they still managed to get a few things right, which is quite an accomplishment. I believe that H.G. Wells was the first writer to introduce the theory of anti-gravity in science fiction in his 1901 book, First Men in the Moon. In the story, a scientist creates cavorite, a metal that shields against gravity, more like a gravity blocker. Since then, thousands of writers have used anti-gravity theory in devices in novels, stories, movies, and TV shows. Needless to say, Shelley's Frankenstein is one of the most famous novels of all time, and quite possibly holds the record for TV and film adaptations. It is as relevant today as the time it was published in 1818, over 200 years ago. While the 1950s saw dozens of giant creature features starring colossal insects and mega monsters mutated by nuclear radiation, the 1970s replaced radiation for pollution and ushered in an amusing era of overgrown critters with schlock B-movie director Bert I. Gordon leading the pack. But Gordon's success in this sci-fi subgenre owes its entire existence to one man, late 19th century, early 20th century science fiction master H.G. Wells. Born in England in 1866, Wells is rightfully famous for such masterworks as The War of the Worlds and The Island of Dr. Moreau, which we will cover in a later episode. However, a lesser-known novel titled The Food of the Gods, published in 1904, would end up inspiring, at minimum, a few dozen sci-fi movies of varying degrees of quality in the latter part of the 20th century, many of them directed by Bert I. Gordon. Gordon was born in 1922 while Wells was still very much alive. He was no doubt inspired by the British author's novels, and in particular, Wells' The Food of the Gods. Gordon was also obsessed with giant monsters, as evidenced by his first feature films, including King Dinosaur in 1955, The Cyclops, 1957, Amazing Colossal Beast, 1957, and others. But it wasn't until 1965 that Gordon made his first adaptation of Wells' The Food of the Gods in the form of a teensploitation flick called Village of the Giants, starring Tommy Kirk, Ron Howard, Beau Bridges, and the titillating Joy Harmon. Bert I. Gordon soon earned the title of Mr. Big. In the film, a nerdy kid called Genius creates a growth compound that results in gigantic animals. A group of teenage delinquents get their hands on the compound, and their giant size make them a terrifying threat to the townsfolk. Despite its crude, low-budget effects, Village of the Giants is well worth watching as a textbook example of 1960s teensploitation films. There is a link to the film in the description. In the Wells book, The Food of the Gods, the substance, called Heracleophobia, is created by scientists that grow children and inadvertently other animals into giant mutations. Eventually, the townsfolk grow to resent the giant children and the monstrous changes to the local fauna. The book is largely thought to be more of a satire than a serious work of science fiction on Wells' part. From LibriVox.com, quote, Wells takes potshot at every member of society. Scientists, ministers, charitable heiresses, revolutionaries, and everyone in between. Yet in the end, Wells shows his faith in both humanity and its never-ceasing progress. Unquote. But Bert I. Gordon wasn't satisfied with one adaptation of Wells' novel. 10 years after Village of the Giants, he directed The Food of the Gods, starring Marjoe Gortner and Ida Lupino. This 1976 B-movie extravaganza finds football star Gortner taking a little vacation on an island, only to discover that the place is crawling with oversized critters who have eaten the naturally occurring growth compound bubbling forth from the earth behind Ida Lupino's ranch. Like any quick-thinking entrepreneur, she's bottling the stuff while giant wasps, rats, and chickens dispatch the townfolk in gruesome and sometimes hilarious ways.
Hello?
A bacteriologist, played by Pamela Franklin, arrives on the scene and discovers that the sticky compound, or goo, has properties never seen before in science. Soon, everyone is being menaced by the oversized atrocities, culminating in a spine-tingling showdown with the giant killer rats. In essence, Gordon used the title of Wells' book to make another adaptation that is even looser than his original effort, Village of the Giants. And Gordon still wasn't satisfied. He came back a year later in 1977 with Empire of the Ants, starring Joan Collins and Robert Lansing. This time, the titular monster Hymenoptera terrorizing people in the Florida Everglades. This was the last giant creature feature that Bert I. Gordon ever made, and while it is loaded with 70s schlock, once again it's worth seeing if only for the comedic value and as another good example of 1970s nature gone wild animals on the rampage flicks. See link in the description. According to IMDb, it looks like a new adaptation of The Food of the Gods is in development. Not much info is given except this tantalizing image on the movie page. Guaranteed there will be a ton of CGI, but perhaps they'll throw in some animatronics and other practical effects. We shall see. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Room 101. If you'd like to read H.G. Wells' The Food of the Gods, see the link in the description. And please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.